Sorry. All right. Back to the slides. The core values reflect the many cultural and educational contexts in which advising is practiced globally. They represent the core values of academic advising of the profession as a whole. The core values apply to all who perform advising, academic advising, regardless of role or title, whether they're a faculty advisor or primary role advisors, whatever their position at the institution. There are 7 values. They are all of equal importance. And they really represent not so much what we do as advisors, but who we are and who we want to become. So these values give us kind of some critical guideposts for our practice. They're part of our beliefs, and they really influence, because they are part of our beliefs, they really influence how we act as advisors. Whoops. There we go. So today's session on integrity, with respect to the core values, the integrity core value states that academic advisors act intentionally in accordance with ethical and professional behavior developed through reflective practice. Advisors value honesty, transparency, and accountability to the student, institution, and the advising profession. So the what advisors are accountable to specifically are the individuals that they advise, our students. We're accountable to involving others in decision-making and problem solving whenever appropriate. We're accountable to our institutions and to higher ed overall. We're accountable to our educational community and to the professional practices and for ourselves personally. So we are accountable to our own profession and practice and acting with integrity for ourselves. And so before we kind of get into how all of this really applies to academic advising, we thought we'd break down some of the important concepts that we hear a lot about when we talk about things like, you know, morals and ethics and integrity. So just to break that down a little bit further, when we think of morals, we think about, you know, knowing what is right and wrong. We know how we live our lives. It's our personal beliefs. You know, what are our morals? The literature says that ethics are really more practical than that. It's really like a guideline that we apply. It really includes kind of how we think about morals, our philosophy about the right action, and the resulting roles of conduct around them. So these ethics can often be influenced externally, you know, maybe by our institutions or by the you know, things that we're involved with, you know, where we work, our family, all of those things, politics, you know, our culture, all of those things might influence our ethics. And then integrity, again, this is the definition of the core value of integrity for advisors. It's really about acting intentionally, right? What do we do? How we act in accordance with the ethics and that we have and that we've developed through, and really about that reflective practice. So again, advisors value honesty, transparency, and accountability to the student, institution, and profession. And so when it comes to professionalism, it's how we act on a day-to-day basis, right? In accordance with those values, how we make decisions, how we apply those values in our work with students and our work with our colleagues, and really about higher education in general.
Hi, everyone. So some of the topics that, we're going to cover today. So you can see on the left, the graphic. And this is just kind of a visual graphic to just show you all of the roles that, we navigate. So you can see at the top, we're cheerleaders, we're advocates, we're educators and gatekeepers. We're institutional representatives. And we also hope that we're role models for our students. So when we need to act with integrity as we navigate these roles every day. And we also have to keep in mind, not only do we navigate multiple roles every day, but we're also responsible to multiple parties. As institutional representatives, we have an obligation to our universities, but we also, as an advisor, are advocates for our students. We need to make sure that we are being professional and that, our ethical decisions, we're using that professionalism on, how to resolve dilemmas. We need to make sure we use professional standards along with ethical guidelines and principles to determine the best course of action. So try not to make a hasty decision. And remember, ethical decisions benefit the most at the earliest point of contact. So, when we're facing an ethical decision, we want to think about how can we do the most good and, how can we make this decision ethically, with integrity, and in the student's best interest. So, when we're making these decisions, we need to think about, how do dilemmas arise? How do these dilemmas happen? How do we encounter them and how do they happen? We need to think about the ethical ideals that apply to the specific situations. We need to think about the steps that help guide our decision making. And we also need to think about tips and strategies that will reduce the complications.
Whoops. Okay. So how might ethical dilemmas arise? So I'm going to ask you guys to maybe think about some of these different areas and where you think there might be some conflict. So when we think about how ethical dilemmas might arise, they are generally going to be in some of the following situations. So anytime there might be a clash between an advisor's values and maybe the values and goals of the institution. How we might have to provide a professional response on a policy that we might not agree with or feel so good about. Maybe we're feeling pressured to get students to act or think in a certain way. Anybody have any practical ideas on what that might look like? Feel free to add in the chat or unmute yourself.
Kate, I was thinking when a student asked me about submitting transcripts from the past, I always say, well, that's your role to be, ethical and to be honest, but sometimes they have a class they don't want to show on a they don't want to, so that's really ethical. They're supposed to submit transcripts from previous schools.
Right. So number 1 and 2 here kind of go together, where that might be a clash between what the university policies are and maybe what the students' values or expectations are. They want to have, are you talking about like prior credit that isn't divulged on the application?
Right. I've had students kind of push that envelope with me, like, I don't want to submit it. And I'm like, well,
yeah.
I sort of say, is that right? I sort of challenge them.
Right. So that's a great example, Helen. I think about that too. Sometimes, there might be certain policies that we have or certain requirements that we have that maybe around probation or maybe around, the transfer process, that students might not feel good about or value or might be upset with. Susie adds about conversations around forgiveness and requirements around Phoenix, so grade forgiveness. So we have a lot of checks and balances here. It's not like we can go in and change, transcripts or change things in Banner necessarily, but, there might be situations where we have to, professionally uphold a policy or try to explain a policy that, maybe we don't agree with. We had some concerns around flat rate tuition when it first came out. What would that mean to our, full-time working students or to, students that are adult learners or, in certain situations where, they couldn't take advantage of the flat rate tuition or it might cause them some disparity. So we spoke up. Any other thoughts? Other big areas would be issues around maybe roles and boundaries. So if you might have a relationship with a student or an advisee that is out of out of the role of an advisor, maybe more of a friend, or not quite that same relationship, or maybe with a colleague, that could lead to ethical dilemmas or ethical issues where you might need to refer the student to another advisor, or maybe find a way to work differently with a colleague or work with a different colleague on something. So that's considered one area where an ethical dilemma might arise. Situations around treating students equitably. If there are certain policies or certain things that you apply to one student but not others, or maybe it's even around, a student comes in late for an appointment, and you might allow one student to have the last 10 minutes of an appointment where another student you might ask to reschedule. And we all know that there's lots of context around when that might happen. It could be the time of day. It could be when you have something else, that you're, up against. But that might be another area where reflecting on how we treat students fairly and equitably. Situation around involving dishonesty or not giving complete information. I don't think there's a lot of like out and out dishonesty, but I think sometimes when we have bad news that we have to deliver, there's hard conversations to be had. Maybe it's easier if we don't necessarily give the full implications or the full information. That could be another area where dilemmas might crop up. Issues around advisor competency, maybe trying to answer questions without, fully having all the information, being fully informed, or, without checking and getting the absolute correct information, trying to answer those questions, get through those emails, get through those, that session, and not being fully informed. Issues around confidentiality within the advising relationship, when you might need to refer or have a conversation with somebody about that student, who else is around? Should you even be giving information about that particular student when it's not needed or required, or maybe within hearing of other people? Situations involving the duty to warn. So I think about, what are the full consequences if the student chooses to act a certain way or to make a certain decision, making sure the student has all the information of what could happen if they, choose to register for certain courses or choose not to take certain steps that you are encouraging them to do or warning them about. Conflicts around the actions of staff and institutional policies. So we have a lot of checks and balances here that, we're not able to register a student before, the wait list is up. But, I know that there might be other institutions where an advisor might be able to do that, or to, register students, over other students, out of sequence, that sort of thing. So these are some of the main areas. Oh, I want to go back to the quote. I like this quote from Frank that integrity begins with us. As role models, there's no better model than for students to see their advisors acting in principled ways, solving problems and basing decisions on values. In this way, students can learn how to think and solve problems ethically as well. So that's a nice plug for how we are role models for students and how we make decisions.
So when we're faced with an issue or a concern, and we've got to make a decision, there are certain ideals that we can kind of use as guides to help us make a decision with integrity. So the first one is beneficence. So that's the idea of thinking about the well-being of your students. Be sensitive to your students' needs and try to serve in their best interest. So, oftentimes students will come into our office, they'll have a concern. And the thing that we need to consider is, what would be in the student's best interest? Obviously, still following university guidelines and policies and procedures, what would be in their best interest in line with those guidelines. So both directly and indirectly, in the short and in the long term. So I'm sure some of you have had this discussion before, but I've had students come into my office and they want to, maybe they're on the old gen ed track and they've got 3 semesters of Spanish and they're really miserable in Spanish. And they'll come into my office and they'll say, Stacie, I really, Spanish is not going well. I want to bypass this Spanish. But as their advisor, I need to think about, okay, if I update this student's catalog term and I put them on the new gen ed, yes, we can bypass that final semester of Spanish, but then we've got a minor to contend with. And for some students, that may not be an issue, but there may be other students that don't have significant coursework in any other area other than their major. So I have to talk with that student, and obviously I want to give them advocacy to make their own decisions. So I never try to talk a student out of something, but I am realistic with my students. And I tell them, yes, in the short term, we could switch your catalog term. And yes, that would solve our Spanish problem. But in the long term, this is how that decision could affect your graduation date. And then, I give them the information that they need. I kind of feel like I'm arming them with information, and then they go on and make the decision that they feel like they need to make for themselves. Step 2, non-maleficence. So again, avoiding any kind of behaviors that cause harm to your student, both directly and indirectly. Justice. So treating all of your students fairly. And, Kate kind of touched on that before. So we want to make sure that, we're treating all of our students fairly. It sometimes can happen where, that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We want to make sure even our students that maybe are on the quieter side, we want to make sure that we're giving everyone the same treatment. Number 4, respecting people. So always being truthful, respect confidentiality, and support student autonomy. So that goes back to that piece of, we're going to arm our students with the information that they need, but ultimately the student needs to make the decision that's best for them. And then number 5 is fidelity. So keeping your promises and honoring your commitments. Implicit commitments are ones built into a role. These commitments play a critical role in student success. So as academic advisors, there are implicit commitments that we have just based on our role and our role in student success. So we're going to give you guys some time to kind of brainstorm in the chat. What do you think? And go ahead, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can, out loud, you can, say what you think. But what are some implicit commitments that guide advisors? So, I can start just to give you guys an idea, but one of our commitments is, we're committed to student success. By our role of academic advisors and helping students, one of our implicit commitments is we're committed for, student success and our students succeeding. So what are some other ideas that you think are some of our implicit commitments?
That's a great one, Sean. Commitment to facilitating student independence.
These are some good ones. Making sure the student has all the information needed to make a decision. I like that one. Susie said, seek out the best opportunities and options for students. I like that, Susie, because sometimes students will come into our office and they need help, but they don't know what kind of help they need and they don't know what kind of resources we have. Financial, good job, Jessica. Nora said advocating for students. I like that. So there's that teaching students to advocate, but also being that advocate. Laura says earning degree, not just taking their money. 100% agree. Helen said we are committed to meeting with students in a meaningful way, right? So making sure that, they're getting something out of appointments with us. Dawn, commitment to ensure that all students feel like they belong. That piece is huge, that belonging piece, especially I feel like in the first couple of years, because yes, students want to get a degree, but they also want to feel like they're part of a community and that they fit in. Jeffrey, meeting students where they are. Yep. Kathleen. I try to reduce student anxiety in pursuing courses in college overall. Yeah, a lot of our students have a lot of anxiety, especially if they're first gen, right? Feeling like, can I do this? Is this something that, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? I've heard that a lot from students. Making a point to listen and allow venting. Yes, venting is important, even for us as advisors. BB, try to be knowledgeable about other departments in WSU to further guide the student. Yeah, that's also important. And I think that kind of taps into, what Susie said about trying to connect students what they need. And then Solaf, acknowledging that it's really important to be knowledgeable about other departments. Yes. I feel like I'm finding that more and more as I go on. I try to make students know they are heard. That's really important, right? Because we may be the only, as sobering as it may sound or feel, we may be the only people that at the university, at least, that the student feels like they can talk to. I've heard that before too. Like you're my person here. You're the person that I can go to. So yeah, making students feel like they are heard. Staying up to date with the policies and changes, Soloft said. That can be a job in and of itself, right? Keeping up with all of the changes in technology and policies and procedures and things like that. This is a really good discussion, guys.
Yeah. Tools for proper communication. Absolutely. And I think, part of making students feel heard is then taking it to the next level and advocating for them if you can, if it's appropriate, if it's warranted, because you truly are hearing them. You truly are getting where they are in a bind or need some help or just need, somebody else to hear their story.
And processing overrides, yes.
Yeah, being available for that, at the crunch time,
Mm-hmm.
which is super hard. Yep. All good things. Navigate environments that even that might not seem fair. So, right, helping them, that's a life skill, right? How to navigate a situation or an environment where they feel things aren't fair or they're not being treated fairly.
And
These are
Kaden,
great.
you touched on like that's a life skill because we're teaching our students how to be professionals, right? Like this is kind of like the training ground. And there are going to be things, when they go out into the work world that are not going to feel fair, right? Like we could all probably share stories of things that have happened that maybe we don't think were fair, but teaching them how to navigate those situations and navigate those challenges, it's really important.
Great responses. So, whoops. So the CAS standards are actually all full of all of these implicit commitments. These are standards that we need to try to uphold as advisors. And so they very explicitly state the things that advisors need to be able to do, including to ensure fair and impartial treatment of all persons, uphold policies, procedures, and priorities of institutions and departments, inform students of ethical obligations and limitations brought about by codes, laws, or licensure. So telling the student, I'm bound by this policy, I'm bound by this law or this rule. Avoiding conflicts of interest that could adversely influence judgment or objectivity. Performing our duties within the limits of our position and our training and our expertise and competence. So that's about referring, right? Knowing where you need to refer out that student to somebody that has an expertise in that area or for whom they are working in the limits of their position, right? So we're not counselors. Many of us have counseling degrees, but when it comes to certain mental health issues, we need to refer that student to a counselor who does that for their job. Obtaining education and training, recognizing the responsibility to ensure that the confidential nature of advisors' interaction with students is not sacrificed. So whether that's closing your doors, locking your screen when you leave your office, making sure you're talking out of earshot of other students and other staff even, is really critical. and holding all staff members accountable. And that can be really hard, but it's that whole when you see something, say something, or hear something, say something, speak up. So we decided to create some decision-making steps. So how to make decisions with integrity. So these are all just some steps that you might want to think about and apply if you find yourself in a situation where you have to make a decision. It's a tricky situation. And how do you apply certain steps to ensure that you are applying all of the ideals that Stacie talked about, maleficence and or beneficence and non-maleficence and justice and all of those things. So these are some steps that you can use when you are in a situation. The beginning would be to assess the situation. So really think about the root issues. You might have had some tough conversations, some drama-filled phone calls, maybe parents are involved, maybe the student and other students are speaking up, but really it takes time to think about what is at the root of the problem or the issue and identify all of the affected parties, right? Who's involved, what are all the facts, collect all the facts, and then from there you can do some further research and maybe gather some other information and data that you need. So what are the policies? What are the rules or procedures or laws that are involved in the case? Is this a case that involves the degree requirements? Is this a case that's going to violate a policy? Is this a situation where the student wants an exception to a rule or a procedure? Doing that research and really identifying what is going on. Are there cultural differences or expectations that need to be considered? So I thought this was interesting as an added piece of research is to think about, where there might be misunderstandings or cultural differences or expectations that, maybe we need to consider that and take that into account with the student. Who needs to be consulted? I think this is really important. When you gather researcher on a situation before you make a decision, do you need to reach out to the registrar's office? Do you need to reach out to a faculty member? Do you need to reach out to another student success office that might be, part of the situation? What information do you need to gather? Do you need to reach out to general counsel information? I know we don't come up against that very often. Or maybe we need to reach out to the dean of students office. What other staff out there could help provide us with relevant information or, examples or past cases that might be helpful to us? And then once you've gathered all of that and you've assessed everything, then it's time to really think about solutions and what their consequences might be. So this is getting at, if we go one direction, who would benefit the most? Who would benefit the least? If we go in a different direction, that same idea, who would benefit the most? Who would benefit the least? Laying out all of the possible solutions and what their consequences might be. And then really applying those ethical ideals that Stacie talked about. Are we maximizing the good and minimizing the harm? I think if you come away with any, little thought or heuristic about this, thinking about, does this do the most good for the people involved and minimizes the most harm? And then don't forget to check your gut and be honest and, never forget your instincts and what they might be saying to you. And then once you've, made a decision, it's always important to act timely and to remember to follow up. So Stacie mentioned this earlier, but I think about, if you're in like the first week of classes and you're taking your time trying to make a decision and all of a sudden it's the second week of classes and they're the third week of classes and then you've missed some deadlines and you might have missed an important date, or maybe the faculty members no longer willing to make an exception. So, when you are up against those situations, don't forget the fact that time can actually work against you. You want to take the time to make the decision, but you don't want to take too much time where you might be further complicating the situation. And then if you refer to other parties and it's appropriate, you might be sure to follow up with them. And then after the decision's been made, you want to always continue to review your decision, review your ethics. How did this become an ethical dilemma? How do you feel afterwards? What does your gut tell you? What have you learned? And what might you do different next time? And then overall, always remember there's always more context out there to make things more complicated. No two cases are ever the same. This is not a cut and dry process. Always attempt to maintain confidentiality, even when consulting others. And whatever you decide, make it sure it's a decision you can stand by, because that is what real integrity really is. Again, Frank's article talks about that advisors should examine what solution is best for the student or situation that is allowable within the institutional rules. There may not be one right answer. Rather, the best decision will lead to an outcome where the least harm is done to all involved.
So we wanted to give you some practical tips that you could utilize in your appointment. So, like we talked about earlier, recognizing ethical dilemmas, it's helpful to recognize those as early as possible. So consider how some of the following practices may help avoid dilemmas or unnecessary complications. And this also helps you deal with each situation with integrity. So ending your appointments by rephrasing the situation or root issue. So sometimes a student will come into your office and be really, really upset and be full of emotion, and they'll state their problem, but then they'll kind of go off on tangents and want to talk about this, or they're upset with the university and everything is going wrong. Everything is bad. So sometimes it can help by concluding the appointment and just, at the end of the appointment and just saying, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you were concerned about your grade in this class. And these are some of the steps that you and I talked about as far as following up with the professor. So just kind of reframing and kind of rephrasing. And this is important because it not only does it kind of re-summarize what you've talked about, but it also lets the student know that you were listening, right? Like if you're able to, rephrase or reframe, we learned that in counseling too, right? So wanting our students to feel heard. If you're consulting with others, tell the student when to expect an answer. This can be huge, right? For students, their emergencies are real emergencies and they have a lot of anxiety about situations. So if we have to consult with the college, if we have to consult with our department chair, it's really helpful to say to the student, you know what, this is a really good question. I'm going to look into this. I'm going to consult with the chair. I should be able to get back with you by Monday or by Tuesday. So that way we're kind of giving the student a definitive when they can expect to hear back from us. And what I've also done in situations is if I tell the student I should get back with you on Tuesday, and Tuesday comes and I'm still waiting for an answer from the chair, I don't leave the student hanging. So I will email the student, even if it's just a couple sentence email, and say, I'm definitely working on this. The chair's been out of the office. He's on vacation or whatever the situation is, right? We're doing additional research, but I just wanted to let you know, I haven't forgotten about you, and, I should get an update by Friday. You would be surprised at how much students just appreciate kind of that check-in. So if it takes longer than you think it's going to take, which can happen, right? Things can get complicated. Just make sure that you reach out to the student in the interim and kind of give them, what I call like a mini update. One thing to think about though, consider if consultation adds undue time that could complicate other issues. So sometimes, like if it's a department rule or statute, sometimes we can't avoid additional compensation, right? We definitely don't want to be responsible for making various changes to the curriculum or things like that. So sometimes we have to consult. But there are other things that are a little bit more clear-cut and things that we could just make a decision on without consulting with numerous people. Sometimes the more people we consult, the murkier it can get and the more complicated it can get. So just think about, first of all, when you get an ethical issue, think about who do I need to consult? And if I do, then, follow your process. But if it's something that you can just make a decision on, sometimes it's easier just to make that decision and then kind of go from there. Be clear what actions the student should take, right? So not only are we rephrasing, the situation, but we're also clear on the things that the student should do, right? So if a student is concerned about a grade, well, as their academic advisor, yes, I have empathy for their situation and I show my empathy and I'm concerned. but I, as their advisor, can't attend class for them and fix their grade. So the student needs to, and then kind of list the steps, right? So I hear you're concerned about your grade. In the meantime, you need to follow up with your professor, find out when the office hours are, document all your communication. So I'm clear on, okay, this is something that, you can work on. Here are things that, you can do. And we're also, when we do that, we're building in advocacy for our students, right? We're teaching them how they can help themselves. And we're also teaching them problem solving skills during that. The other thing is huge. So avoid transference of personal opinion in making decisions. This can be tough, right? Because as their academic advisor, we want what's best for them. And sometimes we think we know what's best for them, right? Like we have that long range view. We're academic professionals. We've been in this field for a long time. I've had it before where a student will come in, their GPA is a little on the iffy side, and they want to take 18 credits. They want to take that full load. And in my gut, I'm like, oh, I think that's a really bad idea. You work full time, you've got a baby, you want to take 18 credits. And I may gently say, you may want, that's definitely something you can do, but let's process this or talk about this. But ultimately, it's up to the student. So if the student is firm on, I want to finish, I want to take 18 credits, then you know what? We need to give students agency to take the 18 credits, right? Obviously there are more intrusive advising things we can do for students that are on probation and things like that. And sometimes we do need to step in and be a little bit more firm, but students make decisions all the time where we just kind of shake our heads and say, well, ultimately it's your decision. So just kind of, being careful when we're advising students and letting them, when appropriate, letting them make the best decision for them. Being clear with students what policies, rules, regulation, laws are at play with their situation. Again, a lot of times students will come into our office, they'll be all charged up, they'll be pretty upset. And just being clear with students, right? Sometimes students think we're out to get them. And I've even had students say, well, this doesn't feel fair. I feel like I'm not being treated fairly. But if you remain level-headed and you just say, okay, I hear your concern. I had a student last week that was concerned. She wanted me to waive a credit of the required 120 credits. She didn't understand why she needed to take one more elective to get to the 120 credits. She wanted me to just waive the credit. I was just clear with her and said, I hear your frustration. I understand you don't want to take another elective, but unfortunately, this is a statute placed with the Board of Governors, and it's not something I can waive. And once I kind of explained to her, like, hey, this isn't just like the department, like, trying to be mean, like this is an actual like statute, this is a university policy, it was fine, like she was okay with it. So sometimes when we just kind of are level-headed and tell students this is at what's going on, sometimes that makes them feel a little better and they back off a little bit. Avoid making a rush decision. So, sometimes we'll, want to just jump in and fix it, right? A student's upset, we can get upset, we just want to fix it. If it's something that's non-complicated, maybe it is something that, we've encountered this before and we can just make the decision. But there will be other things that, okay, we need to sit on it. We need to sit on it for a couple hours and kind of think it through. The final thing though is make good detailed advising notes. I know especially during crunch time, it can be really easy to fall behind on those notes, but it's really important because students will hold you to whatever they think that you've said. So if you have really good appointment notes, you can go back and refer to the appointment notes and then just say, well, actually, I didn't say this. I recommended this. So yeah, if just try to remember, especially during those peak times, to make those detailed notes so that you can refer back to them if needed. And I really liked this quote. This is a quote I found by Erica Compton. She now I think is in administration, but when she wrote it, she was actually an academic advisor. But I really liked this because it says, as everyone is a work in progress, being cognizant of the decisions we routinely face and knowing what we do or fail to do is a reflection of the roles we assume. It is essential to make the decisions with integrity. So I love how that opens up. We're all a work in progress. No one is perfect. We are going to make mistakes with our students as much as we don't want it to happen. We're not infallible. We're human. But we need to be cognizant of the decisions that we make And we need to think about the things that we do, right? Like we've spent a lot of this presentation talking about things that we do, but we also need to think about the things that we don't do. How many times have you had a student come in for an appointment? They leave, and right after the appointment, you think, oh, I should have told them about this internship, or I should have mentioned this. Do we send that follow-up email after, or do we just think, they don't need to know about it right away. I've got a lot to do. I don't have time. So not only focusing on the things that we do and making sure that we do those things with integrity, but we also need to think about the things that we're not doing and how all of those things affect the student and the student's experience.
Okay, so now we would like to do another case study activity with you. And I'm putting a link in the chat, and then I'm going to put everyone into breakout rooms. I'd like you guys to take 6 minutes to discuss a case. And I'd like the case to be aligned with the breakout room you're in. So I'm going to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms. Hopefully you'll see what number your breakout room is, but I'm going to message each breakout room and let them know. So if you're 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, pick that case study. At least one of you or all of you open the link and discuss that case study. Have one person picked as somebody that can take notes and report out, come back, and we'll be back in 6 minutes. So I'm going to put you all in rooms, and just give me a minute to message each room if you don't see your number. Here we go. What did I do wrong? All right, let me try that again. This is weird. Here we go. How do I message? Can you guys see what number you're in? Can you guys see what number you have?